Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Slim and Semm. Semm. Gonna talk about X-Men 97 season 2. And disclaimer, if you're a fan of Breaking Bad, remember the episode with the fly? I left my door open a little bit, like a minute to come in from outside. There's two flies in here, and I didn't have time to kill them. So if at some point during me talking about these first three episodes of season 2 of X-Men 97, you see me wilding out, it's because there's a fly on my face and I'm gonna kill it as soon as I'm off the stream. Trying to stay potentially monetized, but I might let out if the damn things fly in my face. Now, my background, see the background, it's gonna change. Um, we talking about X-Men 97 season 2. The episodes just dropped last week on Wednesday. I was supposed to stream next day Thursday. If you in the northeast New York City area, you know we had ridiculous temperatures, and I was getting power outages in my apartment. So I was like, yeah, I don't want to be in the middle of the stream live on my PC, and that shit cut off, and that cut off, and I don't want to mess up my PC. So I was like, all right, I'll, I'll plan better for next time, but I had to make the executive decision not to stream. And so I'm here today, Tuesday, to talk about what I wanted to talk about last week, Thursday. But hopefully, I'll make it worth your while with some of my insight and just some things that you may have missed. So X-Men 97, the trailers dropped and all that, and everybody was hyped. We had to wait a while, and this season, we've been promised a season every year. We're not gonna talk about the whole Bo DeMayo, controversy and stuff like that. We're not gonna talk about none of that right now. We're just gonna talk about the first three episodes and how they hit, and just my take on them, things I noticed, things I'm hoping for, and if you're watching this live or even if you're watching this later on, drop comments and on your thoughts, any questions you may have. I don't know everything about comics. Nobody does, but I know that I'm passionate about it. I know that I enjoy it, and I just want to share in this great series that we waited so long for them to drop a continuation or something in that same vein of classic peak X-Men stories and quality of like just action and characterization and intricate storylines and all this stuff. And we got X-Men 97, and now we got season 2, and it's all about Apocalypse, right? Apocalypse is the main baddie. He's the main bad guy, not like you're a baddie, but I mean, unless that's your thing, guys wearing a big A on the abdomen, on the stomach. Ensaban Noor, there goes the fly. Apocalypse, he is, the main adversary for the X-Men this season. In season 1, we see him in the ashes of Genosha, and he's speaking in these like very poetic, uh, biblical. I don't know how to say it, like type of Sunday preacher. You going to hell, and the hell is me type of tone that he has, and he was digging out of the dirt a broken, tattered playing card, alluding to the possibility of him resurrecting Remy LeBeau, Gambit, as his horseman, as one of his horsemen, as he did in the comic books, his horseman of death to replace Archangel, who we'll talk about in a second as well. So we have Apocalypse, he's the main bad guy, and whereas in season 1, Bastion was like coming back in time to deal with the X-Men with the knowledge he had from the future. That's essentially what Bastion is, right? A sentinel from that, is from the future a little bit. That's where the tech comes from and all that. Apocalypse is an enemy that you have to take on in multiple timelines. Like that's how big of a problem he is. Uh, he is as inevitable as his name implies. The way they're going about it with X-Men 97 is that they're establishing him as the first mutant. I know that there's a lot of comics and A lot of retcons have been done over the decades, where he was the first mutant, and then we had Selene, and then we had other mutants that preceded him from even like the caveman times and things like that. Which one iteration was like kind of like a Jean Grey type Phoenix character type of thing. In the X Men '97 verse, Apocalypse is the first mutant, and I think that it's kind of appropriate for the story they're trying to tell to make Apocalypse that first mutant. And our X teams get split up, and they have to try to take him on in both in not both, but in the past, present, and the future. And so episode one starts out with Apocalypse and having to go into the future. Now, Cable is kind of the focal point when it comes to protagonists so far. Cable, this child of destiny, this Scott and Madeline Summers' child, sent into the future to try to help deal with the techno organic virus that was put into his arm. Bishop takes him to the future, and when I was watching that, all I could think was like Messiah complex, the irony and the sense that Bishop in the comics was chasing Cable and a baby throughout time, because Bishop was hell bent on destroying that child, believing that it was going to bring on the destruction of his timeline. And then I think they retcon something like Bishop was possessed by a demon or something, whatever. But the irony that Bishop taking a baby through time to save its life rather than chasing one through time to take its life from season one. Cable is the focal point so far, protagonist wise, in season two, because even though the teams are split up, the X teams are split up across the past, present, and future, as I mentioned. Cable is growing up in the future and recalling in the present the lessons taught to him, so that he could do what he needs to do to try to stop Apocalypse from ruling time, but ruling all creation. The survival of the fittest, Darwinian type of tyrannical message that Apocalypse embodies. He's survival of just the absolute most capable, and who's more capable than him, because he was at the beginning and he plans to be at the end. So it's that whole thing. So episode one takes place primarily in the future. With young Nate Dayspring, Ascani Sun Summers, and I'm sure Charles. I know I missed one of his names. He got like 40 names. Not gonna make fun of the hat he's wearing, but part of the X Men team from season one gets sent into the future to be with with Nathan and the Ascani. Mother Ascani, not gonna go too much into that, because she doesn't go too much into that in this first episode. She doesn't really divulge who she is, but there's a lot of hints. When you see in her eyes the phoenix, the symbol of the phoenix, the fact that her power set is both telepathic and telekinetic, the fact that she's an amazing strategist, not that that's necessarily a mutant power, but she embodies a lot of her parents, which are Jean Grey, the actual Jean Grey, not Madeline, and Cyclops. Rachel Summers, a child of the future, trying to use her gifts to curb the rise of Apocalypse, to end his reign throughout all of time, and doing what she has to do, doing what she can in order to ensure the survival of not just mutant kind, but like all kind, because Apocalypse just dominates everybody, everything. So young Nate is who, a lot of the episode is focused on a young Cable, right? Now, while we while most of the story in episode one takes place in the future, we have the reuniting of Bishop and Forge, who, in the original X Men animated series on Fox, Forge was like an old man when Bishop was using his time portal to try to fix the future, which was their present, blah blah blah. And now you got Bishop telling Forge, you got to build this machine. And Bishop has already used it numerous times. It's just that in the present '97 time, Forge hasn't built that yet. And so, he's been they've been looking for the X Men. It's been a few months. I'm not really clear how many months, but it's been enough months that some of these. Oh, fuck cancer. 10 minutes. So monetization. I could curse now. But it's been long enough that Magneto could grow a beard. So, which you'll see. So Bishop and Forge collaborate. They take the time bracelets and they decide, you go to the future, Forge, because that's where, you know, Bishop's time detective skills. I don't know how he figures this out, but has devised that Storm is part of the team that was sent to the future. So he tells Forge, I'm sure you want to go there. I'll go to the past, and I'll get the other team that's back in ancient Egypt. All right. In the meantime, during these months, they've been trying to find Forge primarily has been trying to find the X Men and the active mutants who have been associated with the X Men, like to try to figure out where they are. And there was this whole board he had in the back, very reminiscent of Days of Future Past, with like the deceased or missing type labels across the portraits of a lot of mutants. And some of the notable ones are like Scarlet Witch. It says off world, so I'm in '97, X-Men '97. They're establishing that she's still a mutant. I guess she was one of the silhouettes along with Pietro Maximoff and Polaris, who we'll talk about in a bit. They were silhouetted on the boat in Magneto's subconscious when Charles last season was trying to, well, yeah, previous season was trying to like remind Magneto of who he was and what was important to him. Those three figures were silhouetted in his mind. So Magneto, I don't know if they're gonna go about just saying straight up he's their dad or not, but she was on the board, Scarlet Witch, as being off world. So maybe she's a mutant in this world. They could really use her help if she's not, crazy. They could really use her reality warping powers to assist against Apocalypse. But she's very OP, like for her to be part of the story. It's just interesting that they included her. So the two of these guys, they go into their respective timelines to try to help the X Men. And Forge, excuse me, when Forge shows up in the future, really cool sequence where he's using his guns on these Apocalypse type T 800 looking robots, Terminator looking robots. He's taking them out, but they have a lot of firepower. They're from the future after all. They're in the future. They're present. Their tech, as good as Forge is when it comes to building stuff, you know, he is outgunned. And then he gets the assist from Bone Claw Wolverine, which I wasn't really sure why he got so like exhausted. It was cool that they showed him moving around super fast comparatively to how Wolverine be moving in the X Men animated stuff previously. I mean, he's quick, but never this quick. And I guess it's attributed to the fact that you don't have the adamantium wearing him down. The adamantium skeleton weighs a couple 100 pounds on its own because it's this unbreakable material. It's not light like vibranium is. You know, so he's moving around a little quicker, even though his claws are now just bone. He can't really slash up enemies the way he does in the past. He's still, he's still penetrating skulls of these robots. Bones are breaking off mid swing, and he's just regrowing them with his healing factor. But I thought it was interesting that he was like kind of weakened just after that short burst of action, and Forge was like holding him up when Bay shows up, when Aurora shows up, and sweeps up the last of those what were they called, the apocalypse robots, and reunites with Forge, her love in the series. And Forge just kind of lets Wolverine go after being a crutch for him. Once he sees Aurora, gives her a kiss. So we have the X team. Storm. We're gonna come back to this pick, but we have the X team. Cyclops and Jean, who I guess has fully embraced the concept that her and Madeline, even though they were two separate, were one because of their shared memories. There was a lot less ambiguity when it came to Jean establishing herself. Like she's Nathan's mom. She's there's no like questioning that or second guessing that, and her and Scott seem to be more on the same page this season than they were last season. And she sends Scott, who's still the leader, even though they're in this timeline, sent Scott to talk to Mother Ascani to try to figure out what's the deal here with Nathan, and whether or not they have his best interest in heart and things like that. And Scott is trying to make up for being a bad dad. He feels really guilty about sending Nathan away, which, believe it or not, if you're not that familiar with the comics, season one, Scott Summers sending Nathan away, he didn't have the, I don't know what you call it, restitution. I don't know. He didn't have it in him to be present for the goodbye. But believe it or not, that's a lot better than he handled things in the comics. In the comics, Homeboy just like walked out, walked away. Bruce Banner walked back, only hitchhiked down the road to get out of there from the whole situation. you know, he was a worse dad in the comics. That being said, I mean, Corsair still holds the title in the Summers family for being a bad dad, because Homeboy just went swashbuckling into the cosmos and left all his boys just scrambling here on Earth, not even knowing about one another. But Scott, still calling the shots and leading things. They end up getting kidnapped, scooped up by Apocalypse's last horseman. There's a whole cool train sequence when the remaining team goes to rescue Scott, Jean, and Nathan, and you get this awesome moment where Mother Ascani basically tells Storm, like, you're more capable. She basically says, you're more capable than you think you are. You could command the cosmos. You could command solar flares. Like you're seen as a goddess here on Earth with your ability to manipulate nature, but nature extends beyond the Earth. You know what I mean? And Storm, just being told that she could, she didn't even have to understand how. She just tapped in right away, commanded a solar flare to power up the ship that they needed to pursue. They kidnapped, the nabbed up, captured Nathan, Scott, and Jean, and the X Men have a cool, fight sequence where they're all just moving in sync with their powers. And what I'm really hoping is that the MCU in the live action captures that, because there are a few teams in Marvel that can move like the X Men move tactically. Like when you think about like the Avengers and like Age of Ultron, which is where you see a lot of the in sync comic booky splash, sequences of them fighting alongside one another with little moments of teamwork. The X Men do that on the regular. You know what I mean? Like the X Men are able to do that because they've been trained from day one, as a lot of them as child soldiers, and being linked telepathically, whether Gene's on the field or Charles is in the field, or even back at the mansion. They sync up their abilities and their movements in ways that are very dynamic, very cool. They fight as one, but with their various powers, it makes them very impressive. So whereas Scott, Jean, and Nate were taken aback by the last horseman, the first encounter, on the second encounter, they had the game plan fixed. They knew exactly what to do. And Scott and Jean were gonna figure that out, whether they had the backup coming or not, because you could tell Jean made the adjustment when she had her force field up the first time. Two of the last horsemen was still able to penetrate the telekinetic bubble somehow, and harm her and Scott, and then incapacitate Nathan. Whereas the second time around, those same two horsemen were attacking Jean again, and they weren't getting through this time. So whatever adjustment she made was there. Nate also was tapping into his powers on a different level at that point, because he was able to get out of the restraints. Which that one I was kind of confused by that, because in that scene they all had the inhibitor collars on, the ones that we, the bling bling, the hateful bling bling on the muties. Excuse the slur. They all had that on. The three Summers family members did, along with being restrained. But Nate was still able to, continuing on the lesson that Jean was showing him earlier. I skipped that part, but he was able to still control the techno-organic virus in his arm using his telekinesis, his telepathy, using his powers. he was able to command it to travel down his arm into the collar to essentially bust free from that. And it also establishes, I guess, how Cable gets the full arm infected, which is what he's most known for, that iconic look of having one of his arms, like completely covered in the virus. In the beginning of this episode, like it was only like his hand, like up to his wrist, just about, um, where the virus had reached. But to get out of this collar, to get out of the situation, he let the virus spread purposefully all the way to the collar to bust out. But the rest of the X Men show up. Storm shows up. Great ensemble. Great moment where that Confederate soldier guy is rat a tat tatting, drumlining, and it goes and beat with the X Men theme, and then he gets frozen by Storm's cold, icy winds. Really cool moment that they did there with the sound, the sound effects, the sound direction. The Newton brothers, I think their names are the composers that do a lot of the music for the series. They knock it out the park all the time. Even the music where Ozymandias in this episode is walking up to, that's the name of the sand guy with the turban type thing on his head. And excuse me if that's not the proper term for his headwear, but Ozymandias, he can turn into like sand or whatever. He's talking with Apocalypse, who's Orochimaruing, looking for a host body or whatever. Uh, Even the music of him just walking up to Apocalypse's place of you know whatever you call it, not resurrection chamber, but his revival chamber, whatever, where he's trying to heal up so that he can go about being the force of destruction that he is. Even that music was incredible. So young Nathan and the X Men, they are able to chase Apocalypse away. Apocalypse says you gotta take them out, take the X Men out in the weakest in the '90s, which it's like, you sure that's the weakest? That might be the strongest. Um, but young Nathan Daysprings, Charles Summers, whatever, Ascani's son, he puts his hand through essentially computer, which he calls computer a lot, computer or professor in the comic books as well. His little onboard computer, his AI assistant that he has. His arm, goes from looking kind of homemade from a box of scraps to smooth tech, and then we cut to Nathan in the future, or rather in the present, talking about, you know, we got to chase down Apocalypse. He's talking to his team of just him and two other individuals, Psylocke and Archangel, who look phenomenal. And Psylocke, oh man, they made her look so fucking cool in episode two. But at the end of episode one, we cut back to Nathan Cable, grown ass Cable. It's going from the future to the present, but it's from young Cable to old Cable, experienced war veteran Cable. And he's talking about we got to recruit, opens up the folder and shows off Jubilee, Jubilation Lee, and Sunspot. And so we know that in last season, Sunspot and Jubilee were not on Asteroid M. Jubilee was falling because they were in the upper atmosphere of the Earth. Jubilee was falling. Sunspot scoops her up, and they land in that sort of that weird type of, I don't know how to call it, Nuketown village, like for the Call of Duty fans, that Bastion had set up, and they were on looking at Asteroid M along with Val, the U.S. Government liaison to mutants, which we'll talk about her in a sec, and Forge, I believe, and Cable. And they saw Asteroid M, just disappear, just out. And but they remained, and Jubilee and Sunspot were just like kind of doing their thing. In the meantime, they don't actually look like this. They don't look like this. Uh, at the beginning of episode two, but this is how they will look. So episode one finishes, and we know that Cable, Archangel, and Psylocke are going to try to recruit the abilities and of Jubilee and Sunspot, young mutants who haven't really been in it that long. But episode one goes on, and if I had to rate episode one, 9.5 out of 10. 9 out of 10. It was great hype. A lot of things were cool, but until you watch the other episodes, not everything comes together just yet. So episode two, talking about recruitment, talking about we got to get these young bloods on the team, train them up a little bit. It's not really clear how long after the events of the end of season one, where Asteroid M disappears. It's not very clear how much time passes from then to when Cable actually recruits Jubilee and Sunspot, but he recruits them with enough time to train them up a little bit. Him and Psylocke train these two up in the use of their powers and also in just general combat skills. Things that, Jubilee's very young as an X-Men. She probably hasn't had a lot of reps, and Sunspot has almost none. So in a short amount of time, in just a few months, I guess, you know, the Cable and Psylocke and Archangel train these two up to a great extent. Um, and it's a really cool moment at the beginning of episode two, which is a lot of people talked about how cool it was when in the opening credits after Cable goes to recruit these two, Jubilee asks him if there's a team, what's the name of the team you making? Because I'm an X Man, so what y'all gonna be? And we see X Force basically take over the opening sequence of the X Men animated series, which is amazing because the X Men animated series opening is like one of the most iconic, beloved openings of any animated series ever. There's even been, petitions for Disney Plus to remove the skip intro option, like just to not even have it as an option to skip the intro to X Men '97. And to be honest with you, I think they should do that because X Men '97 is one of those few series where the opening credits, like the opening sequence, changes sometimes to give you a little bit of insight into what is going to happen in the episode or who the focus is going to be in the episode. And they intercut, little clips of when they'll show who the main bad guy is going to be, like things like that. So very similar to like Game of Thrones, nobody skips that intro. And in this case, the intro was very special because it was the X Force with Cable and Psylocke and Archangel, Jubilee, and Sunspot taking the place of the usual team of like Professor X, Cyclops, Beast, Storm, Jean Grey, Wolverine, Gambit, Rogue, what have you. So Nightcrawler, Beast, and everything. So very cool opening sequence there. The episode also includes eventually another competing X team. In this case, is X Factor. For fans of the original X Men animated series, we've seen X Factor, we've seen Polaris and Strong Guy, Havoc, Multiple Man, Wolfsbane. Like we've seen them before, but in this series, the U.S. government trying to improve mutant relations and everything following the events of Asteroid M. It seems like the government, or at least the public, is willing to accept the fact that yeah, Magneto did what he did, but ultimately what Bastion did was worse because my next door neighbor, my dad, my mailman, whatever, they all turned into Sentinels. But the X Men stopped that, and the X Men also prevented, it seemed, an asteroid from crashing into the Earth, which would have killed everyone. So it seems like in some cases the view on mutants is a little bit more positive, a little bit. It's not completely rectified. It's the PR hit of Xavier being alive and the spin that Bastion put on the fact that the X Men were lying to the public about his death to garner approval and shit or sympathy or whatever. I think that's been balanced out by the events of the end of season one. So the government sanctions a team instead of spending money on robots to kill mutants. They put together a team of mutants to help kind of self-regulate the mutant community. Now, their version of self-regulation seems to just be capture and imprison. And I guess their logic on that was better you're in prison and protected from a hateful, violent society than try to be a part of it. You know what I mean? Like instead of teaching people not to be violent against mutants, we'll just seclude you in this, makeshift helicarrier, and and so the face of that initiative is the X Force, led by Havoc, who is Alex Summers, brother of Cyclops. I think I think maybe uh we know, or rather the X-Men know, that this Alex is related to Cyclops, because in the original series they didn't know each other. They didn't know each other, and Cyclops hit Havoc in the chest with his optic blast, and nothing happened. And Havoc, Alex Summers hit Cyclops with his powers, and nothing happened. And they were like, "Huh?" Like they were completely flabbergasted by the fact that their powers were negated, like they just were ineffective against one another. So the reason I think that now they know is because of a joke that Jubilee makes when she gets captured, because eventually she gets captured by the X Force after a really cool moment, which I'll get to in a second. And she calls Havoc a knockoff Cyclops. Now, it could just mean that you're not the leader that he is of an X team, of a mutant team. But I mean that one was a little bit too on the head. I think they know at this point, maybe. But anyway, you got the X Factor, and they're trying to do their part to help mutant kind, but they're not being very kind to their fellow mutants. To their fellow mutants. Now Emma Frost makes an appearance here. The the X Force team, they are tracking down the member of Apocalypse's horseman known as War. He's the green faced guy, weird bowl cut, looks ridiculous. Has like a thunderclap type move that he used in the original series that Sunspot counters beautifully in the encounter that they have with him in Brazil. Very cool. Psylocke, is ninja like. She's using her telekinetic blades. She's infusing her weapons with telekinetic energy. She's using her telepathic attacks. Archangel is, flying around being the eyes, the freaking UAV for the team, giving the sit rep. And Cable is, calling the shots, triangulating the team to targets acquisition. And they get them, they get their information, and they eventually are led to Emma Frost, who thankfully was found as a survivor of the tragedy at Genosha, with her secondary mutation, which she exhibits in this scene right here, just turns to diamond form and is impervious to physical attacks of any kind, as she watches how the X Force, who she was working with, ambushes Cable's team in Switzerland, I think it is. Switzerland, I guess, was the base of operations for Apocalypse, who was looking through some fancy looking casket, which is, come on, it's Gambit's casket. And he had technology more advanced than what they used on Archangel to turn him into death. He had technology here that looks similar to that, but more advanced. Therefore, whatever he turned Gambit into is probably way more of a threat than Archangel was as Death, because of Gambit's battle prowess and power set. So Emma makes an appearance. She looks awesome. I hope that eventually, maybe to make amends for her betrayal of the X Mutants and Jubilee and whatever, that she does become part of the team. A lot of people who are even aware of Emma Frost, they're stuck on this idea that she's a villain. But in all reality, I believe she's been a hero and a member of the X Men for longer than she was even with the Hellfire Club. As a villain. A lot of people that know her now, popularly through like Marvel Rivals and things like that, because of her appearance there as a playable character. Emma has a lot of swag. She has a lot of attitude. She very, diva-ish, and she backs it up with an incredible power set and with her dedication to not just herself in fashion and riches, but to her fellow mutants. Like she as a protagonist, as a good guy, she takes especially her relations with younger mutants very seriously. That is the closest thing to her heart. Her diamond cold heart is the well being, the upbringing of young mutants. And so I'm hoping that maybe this, her interaction with Jubilee, betraying Jubilee, maybe Jubilee plays the role of Shadowcat for Emma, the way in the comics Emma and Shadowcat's back and forth was like Shadowcat representing the fan base that was skeptical of a former Hellfire villain being part of the team. Like, how dedicated are you? Are you reformed? You know, being that voice, and Emma basically proving herself to the point where Kitty Pryde sacrifices her own life um, to to Emma to Emma's astonishment. In the astonishing X Men run of comics. So maybe Jubilee will play that role for Emma here in the X Men '97 series, where Jubilee will be skeptical of whether Emma is a good guy now or not, and she'll have to prove it to Jubilee in that sense. Maybe that's what will happen. But I'm hoping that they bring her aboard. And yes, I'm hoping it gets messy with Scott and Jean and Emma because that is peak drama. that is just peak X Men filthy romance type of stuff. And I just like Emma as a character. I really do. Anyway, so Emma Frost is here. She betrays the X Force. She betrays X Force. Jubilee gets captured by X Factor. But let's talk about Jubilee real quick. This is obviously, well, maybe it's not obvious, but this is artwork of Jubilee, who's just today uh, confirmed, announced and shown as the one of the new characters for Marvel Rivals season 9. And I'm not gonna get into the whole why is there an A on her belt and not an X, because that Marvel Rivals has its own like continuity and storylines and stuff that goes on. But basically, one second. So basically, she's been confirmed, and I think she's a strategist and blah blah blah. And a lot of people have been, really anticipating her being added to the game. But more so than that, fans of the X Men '97 series have been just waiting for Jubilee to like have a moment. Like, she was recruited in the very first episode. The Sentinels attacking the mall and this and that. And from that point on in the X Men animated series, Jubilee's had very little time to shine. But in this episode, in episode 2 of season 2 of X Men '97, Jubilee shows just how capable she can be with her powers, with her creativity, and with her heart. Because she could have just escaped. She could have just escaped the X Factor's facility and left and just gone on with Cable, rendezvoused with the team, and continue their search for Apocalypse. But she didn't. She turned it into a whole rescue mission with the help of Polaris, who Jubilee talked no jutsu into remembering, hey, Polaris, weren't you an X-Man once? I don't know if the X-Men would be cool with the way y'all moving with the government, just locking mutants up. Not cool. Valerie Cooper, who witnessed firsthand what happened in Genosha, and who, pressed the button on Magneto's restraints to free him from Bastion's clutches in season 1. I don't know why she thinks this is the best way, the best solution to help mutants is to just lock them up and keep them separate from society. I mean, in her mind, she's probably thinking, well, at least we're not killing them. But no, Jubilee's not with that. And there are a ton of cameos, ton of appearances of mutants in the holding cells alongside Jubilee. The Stepford Cuckoos, well, three of them there. There's supposed to be five. Three of them were there, and like for fans that recognized who they were, it was kind of tragic that two of them were in one cell and one was in the other, and they were all huddling next to the wall that separated them, crying, even though they had the collars on, they didn't have the telepathic link that they all share. Uh, for people that are for fans that are aware of how their power set works, the Stepford Cuckoos, it was kind of sad that they weren't all in the same cell. that's kind of messed up. And other, Chamber, who's a Generation X member, one of my favorites growing up. Chamber, who basically has a fiery chest that covers his whole lower half of his face. His power set is very very cool, but he was very '90s in his design. He was there, and a couple of other young mutants, including Quentin Quire, was there as well. Which I'm not gonna get into how the timelines don't make sense for Quentin Quire to be there at that time, along with other mutants. But I don't care. I love that character, and I hope that he gets some time to shine as well in either this season or future seasons. But Jubilee has, her prison outbreak moment. She takes on a whole battalion of soldiers on her own. Shows off the CQC moves that she has, that she learned and picked up from Cable and from Psylocke. Even in the opening sequence, they showed very. That's why I knew that they had trained her. They showed very briefly in the opening sequence where X Force is the prominent team and not the X Men. They showed Jubilee blindfolded and like sparring with Psylocke as Cable looks on. So like they were teaching her how to fight, and along with just how to fight, also how to use her powers in a more effective way when it comes to her offensive capabilities, and her experience with her alternate reality digital future self in the episodes with Mojo in season 1, where she encounters a simulation of herself that is a lot older in experience. She starts to create constructs in this episode. She starts to create constructs with her. Is it pyrokinetic? I don't know how to explain her firework powers. They look like fireworks. She's able to create physical constructs with that. She makes like this twirling kind of blade that goes around and knocks out a whole ring of soldiers that are surrounding her. Really cool. And she jumps off the helicarrier in a badass moment. And there's a cool, again, with the sound and using that. Before she takes on the soldier, sorry to backtrack. Sorry. She turns on her Walkman, very Peter Quill, Star Lord ish esque, to play music as she's beating everybody's ass. And then before she initially jumps off the helicarrier with a parachute, Havoc or Valerie shoots the parachute out of her hand, and then she has a badass moment, throws down the shade, jumps off anyway, and the music had stopped when her parachute got hit. Sorry, I forgot to mention that part about the sound design and the usage of it. She jumps off, Sunspot scoops her up, little kiss on the cheek. Mission accomplished. Rescue mission, impromptu rescue mission of Young Mutants accomplished. And Cable's proud. He's proud. He looks out the window, even though he gives them a little shit for it when they get back. Like, oh, we should have done that, because he got to be that grizzled, hard, hard ass type of leader. But in his heart, he's like, yeah, I picked a good one. I trained a good one. She is a good one. And even though I gotta keep hold the line when it comes to discipline and all that stuff and following orders, this is the kind of ad lib. This is the kind of impromptu, freestyling type of mission I'm down for, because it helps kids. And then he remembers, how he was a capable kid, and how even as a child he was trained up and told from jump, hey, you have like an impossible mission ahead of you, but you're the one who has to do it. And he made the hard decision to time slide his parents back into their appropriate timeline, even though he wanted nothing more than to spend more moments with them. But he knew he had to sacrifice that because he had to grow up and follow the path ahead of him to become the Cable, the leader that he is. Very, very John Connors like Terminator type of thing. But Cable is the actual payoff for that. If you're a fan of the Terminator movies, John Connor never like materializes as the leader we were hoping. We never get to see that. But Cable, every time, his theme music, every time that comes on, he got the gun half the size of his body, and the future tech and the abilities. You're like, yeah, he's a badass. Yeah, his ruined childhood was worth it. But anyway, the episode ends with Cable remembering that he had to make a tough choice as a kid, but that as a child soldier, he was raised right on the path. And even though it's a path that a lot of mutants probably don't even know he's walking, he does it for them to try to make their future better than the one that he knows will happen if he doesn't make that difference. Jubilee has an incredible moment. And like I said, a lot of people have been waiting for that. You get to play her in Marvel Rivals very soon when season 9 comes about. Episode 2, I give it a 10 out of 10. It was even better than the first episode for me because of the Jubilee moment, you know, them solidifying like Cable as this leader, and at least so far, he seems to be the focal point as a protagonist. And of course, Archangel is an all time favorite of mine. Psylocke, they just, so many moments were really cool. So, great episode 2. Now, moving on to episode 3. So the first episode took place in the future, the apocalyptic future. The second episode was in the present with Cable and his X Force team trying to figure out what Apocalypse is up to. Them not knowing that they're on the tail of essentially Gambit's body, Gambit as the Horseman of Death. Them not knowing that, but basically them heading on the path to find that out. Episode 3 takes us to the X team who was in the past. And like I mentioned earlier, they've been in their respective timelines separated um, for enough time for Magneto to grow a full beard. You know what I mean? Like, whereas Bastion was shaving him down towards the end of season 1 of X-Men 97, they have been, this team has been in ancient Egypt long enough for him to grow the full Moses out. And speaking of Moses, Magneto is hell bent on being a leader and doing something he feels that no one else has the keyholes to do. And that is take advantage of the fact that they are in the presence of a young Insabanur, a young Apocalypse, and perhaps mold him and guide him in a way that instead of him becoming this, tyrannical, brutal, bloody villain, for from everyone else's perspective. The best villains always think that they're the heroes, right? Apocalypse thinks he's doing the right thing, but yeah, villain. Um, Magneto is convinced that he can mold him, that he can mold in Sabanor, shape his values in a way that he won't grow up to just be like, you know what, you weak, you dead. Instead, you weak. I'm strong. Let me lead. Nah, Magneto wants him to think like that, but it's not gonna work. Homeboy, Esteban Noir is he not for that. He knows only one way, and that way is, oh, you weak, you die. And his power set is not fully defined here. He knows he's a mutant because Magneto has told him as such. He knows he's different because physiologically he is different, not just in his look, which he hides a lot of the time around a lot of folks with that red scarf around his neck. He holds it over his face to cover the blue lips thing, which, and his red eye. Well, the red eyes he lets shine, but physiologically he's different. He appears different, but also physically, he's immensely strong, durable, fast, in terms of quickness, not Quicksilver fast, but I'm just saying he does not he has superhuman abilities because he is above human. He is Homo superior. He is a mutant. And in the X-Men 97 verse, he's the first mutant. And so they try to guide him. Magneto tries to guide him, but ultimately, that does not work. Um, and in the process of trying to mold Apocalypse to be a person who is not going to just squash everything under his boot and and be king of the ashes essentially in the future, or king of the corpses, because in front of his facility or whatever, I don't know what they call it exactly, but his home base of operations in the future, that from episode 1, all you see strewn about is just bodies, hundreds, thousands of bodies of dead mutants. beings that he has deemed not strong enough to survive. And so they try to do that. Professor X at first is like, nah, I don't think that's a good idea. Beast, when he finds out, is like, bro, like that's what you got us doing, Magneto. Like we trying to get out of here. And that's the plan. Like we ain't got time for this. Um, but that doesn't work. And it doesn't work, especially after Charles reluctantly decides to try to interrogate one of the enemies of Apocalypse and his Storm Riders. Storm Riders. Forgot the name of his team, but anyway, he tries to infiltrate the mind of one of their ops, and he sees this vision. This is part of it in the background behind me. Charles sees as part of this vision, very reminiscent of what happened to Madeline, or rather to Jean. No, Madeline, one of them, in season one, when they were taking a look into the mind of was it William Stryker? Was it Stryker? Yeah, when they went into his head and they saw what they didn't know was the attack of the Wild Master Mold, Wild Sentinel on Genosha, and the extinction or the erasure, the genocide of so many mutants. Reminiscent to that, we see very trippy visuals during this mental excursion, this telepathic excursion that Charles takes to the mind of Logos. That's the name of the bad guy that I was talking about. And this is one of the things that he sees. And that helmet, that I mean that moon, that planet, whatever you want to call, looks very similar to Magneto's helmet, but also very similar to Onslaught's helmet. For those that are aware or know about that particular foe in the X Men Marvel comic universe, and even in the arcade game and Marvel's Capcom, is one or two. You fight you fight Onslaught, and he sees this, and there's also like a face. You can see the face in the sands or whatever in the land there. Who's that? I don't know, but I do think that this is hinting at Onslaught. I think X Men '97 is gonna we are gonna get an Onslaught type of storyline. And the way that Wolverine looked with the bone claws when he was wearing that like the blue bandana type of outfit. I mean, that was his look during the onslaught storylines in the comics. That's how he was looking. And I know he's gonna get his brown suit back eventually, but that this just reminded me of Onslaught, and I think that eventually Charles and Magneto's relations will strain to the point where we see the manifestation of this character, this enemy. And I mean, if you're gonna escalate from Bastion to Apocalypse, Onslaught would be that escalation in terms of like an ex villain. If your intention is to further escalate things, uh, yeah, he would definitely be that. Because whereas Apocalypse takes multiple timelines to attack and face, a lot of the times it's the X Men only that end up dealing with him, and finding a way to beat him. With Onslaught, it it took the entire Marvel universe. It took Franklin Richards to create a pocket universe to counteract the effects of what Onslaught had done. It was pretty crazy. So that's how you would, I guess, one up this season. But that's thinking ahead. The aforementioned Apocalypse. This is his face of like, all right, I'm done with Magneto's leadership and guidance. I don't trust y'all no more. I'm gonna let it blast on you. I'm gonna let it blast. Pause. What the? I don't know why I said that. All right. Anyway, where he's like, all right, I'm gonna take y'all out because y'all for foolishness. I thought I could trust y'all. I can't. And he's ready to like attack all of them. Bishop shows up in the clutch. Bishop shows up to give the X Men that are the time displaced X Men team in the past some backup. and pretty much helps dispose of all of Apocalypse's Storm Riders or Sand Breakers, whatever, I forgot what they call. And they're 1v1 against them, and then as they're 1v1 against them, right? A beam hits the Sandstormers, Sand Riders, the base, like their mountain base. It looks very reminiscent of like the home base of the man from Dune. I forgot the name of the. All right, this is an X-Men episode anyway, not a Dune episode, but it looks very similar to that. And we get King Ramatut laughing because he hit them with a beam, and it's a cloud of dust, and the episode ends saying to be continued. We know that they survive somehow, but Ramatut, who, I mean, there's an image of him on the right side of the screen. He is a version of Kang. For those that may not know, if you saw Ant-Man Quantumania, the technology that version of Kang was utilizing, those kind of spheres, those rotating um, spheres that embodied a lot of the contraptions that he was using to harness his powers and his technological superiority, um, is very similar to what Ramatut is using in this episode. The spherical overlapping circle type of contraptions, machines that he's using from his future technology to rule the past. And it shoots that yellow beam out, hits the location of where the X Men and where Ensabanur are, and then did they survive? Of course they did, but we gotta. But anyway, that is a version of Kang, and I find it interesting because I don't think that I don't think this is a slight in any way from the X Men '97 creators or whatever. But I think it is very interesting that I mean, you have to include him if you're going to be comic accurate, DK, because Ramatut was the pharaoh in power when Ensabanur was growing up. But I find it interesting that along the way to tell the apocalypse story, they did include this because it's like Kang is like a Fantastic Four and an Avengers villain, and he's a huge threat. Don't get me wrong, but I find it interesting that essentially what they're showing you is that Kang is doing all this work, going into the past with his future tech, basically going into the 1950s with like Wembenyama and Shaq and a resurrected Kobe, like he's going back in time to rule the NBA, with a squad in terms of he's going back in time to fight people who lived in the sand and fought with bronze, if that weapons, and he's going there to fight them with lasers and laser whips and automatons, and he's doing all his work to try to stifle the rise of apocalypse because in almost every timeline where Kang has been, the future problem is apocalypse. So he's like, damn, let me go back and dominate the past to try to stop apocalypse, and he's not gonna be able to do it. Kang is not the answer. Young Nate and the X Men are gonna be the answer. But I find it interesting that this MCU Avengers villain who fizzled out because of many reasons, blah blah blah. Ant Man beat him, but he was supposedly going to be like the villain of an entire saga in the MCU. He's just a stepping stone. He's just a footnote in what Apocalypse is and the impact Apocalypse has on the timeline that he is existing on. I think that's pretty interesting. But anyway, the episode ends with that to be continued thing. But we've seen the trailer. We know that eventually the whole squad is gonna do exactly that. Squad up. I know he looks weird in the background, Cable, but he's reaching back and getting that gun that's half as big as his body. Wolverine appears here to have his adamantium back somehow. Jean and Cyclops are in their new X Men attire, which that would technically very much be their like X Men 2000s attire. Like, is X Men 97 ever going to change from being X Men 97 into like X Men 2000s? I don't know. But we got Storm, Archangel, Forge in the background. That I believe that's Jubilee, and it pans out and shows a lot of the ex heroes all ganging together to fight a threat. We know that this will eventually come. So as far as where this is headed, I've put my speculations throughout the breakdown. I've had you here for an hour. You've seen me swatting at flies. You've seen me say some things that I just slipped. But hopefully you got something out of this breakdown. The next breakdown is only going to be for one episode, which will be this Thursday. Slim and Seven. I'll be back on Thursday talking about episode 4 of X Men '97, which airs tomorrow on Wednesdays. So yeah, we know that eventually we're going to lead up to shots like this. Who they're facing, who are our ex heroes facing, I don't know, but it's been exciting so far. I'm glad they dropped those 3 episodes because there's a lot to take in, but damn, the momentum is strong, and I can't wait and look forward to seeing more. Episode 3, I give that like a 9, 8.5 out of 10. It was a little slower paced. I like the moments with Charles and Magneto though, where Magneto was basically pleading his case with Charles, like, "Hey, if I could get your message earlier though, like 5,000 years earlier, then hey, isn't that a win?" And I like how it blows up in his face. Doesn't work, but at least he's trying, right? At least Magneto's trying. I don't know how Wolverine is gonna get his adamantium back. I don't know. Al, I appreciate the thumbs up. I didn't see that earlier. But yeah, I don't know how he gets his adamantium back. We'll see. But anyway, thanks for joining. Thanks for listening. If you stood this far, I appreciate you. If you could like, subscribe, that'd be great. I'm trying to establish something here on YouTube. I'm trying to establish something with live streams. I could use help with production and stuff like that. So I appreciate, my nephew Fino Ruff with helping me with encouragement and stuff like that, and for friends and stuff for chiming in and giving me encouragement as well. Uh, but hey, if you love X Men, I do too. Hopefully, I conveyed that love and shared it, the love of X Men stories and characters with you. And yeah, check it out. Check out the show, the episode on Thursday. Watch X Men '97 on Wednesdays, and yeah, thank you for spending time here with me.